Bahamas. Why do you do it? Well, it's easy to get to in a single engine airplane. About the longest passage that you have to do is about 58 miles. The nice part about that passage is if you look down, there's a boat every mile. It's a very crowded strait, and so if you had a problem and you had to put the airplane down, if I had to, I would get somebody on the deck of their boat very wet and scare the crap out of them. English is a native language. Tourism is the big industry. There's not, some islands, have a lot of have and have not hostility. That doesn't seem to be present in the Bahamas. People are very, very nice in the out islands, and the fact that you're bringing a tourist dollar is an appreciated event because that's their industry. Customs are super easy. U.S. dollars readily accepted. You don't have to do a currency exchange. And then once you're there, island hopping is really easy. A lot of the passages are as little as 9 or 10 miles, and some might be, a big passage might be 100 miles, but during that you would cross over 3 or 4 islands with hospitable airstrips. And so there's really not much more. Once you're in the Bahamas chain, there's a bailout pretty much within 20 miles wherever you are. There's good phone and internet coverage. And for me, being a late middle-aged person, it satisfies my escapist fantasies in that when I want to get away, it's really away. Another nice thing about the Bahamas is fuel is very expensive there, but there are fuel subsidies available, which I'll touch on later. Well, the trip mission here was, and when I go to the islands, we go where the cruise ships don't go, and we go to where the commercial airplanes don't go. And it's a completely different experience. It really is like the brochures where you see the white sugar sand beach and it's 5 miles long and there's not another body on it. And then when you get there for real, there's 2,000 of your closest friends from the cruise ship. Well, when you go do back island flying in your own aircraft, those beaches are empty and you're by yourself. So that's my daughter, she's my regular co-pilot. And she does handstands wherever we go around the world. But that's swimming with the sharks and just hanging out, and there's nobody there. That was one trip. This was another trip. The girl under my arm is my goddaughter. She grew up with us. She's Ivana, and the same daughter up above was on another trip with me. The map of the Bahamas, it's about 450 miles down the chain. And roughly, 90 miles across the chain. The way we always go is we start here and we work our way across the north and just island hop down this way, turn around, come back up, usually finish up at Andros for the launch back home. Bimini is a good midway point, if nothing else, to just reassure yourself that there is land. Even though I've never landed there, I always cross over it. Grand Bahama is also nice to fly over. It's about 60 miles long, and so you get the comfort of having dry land underneath you. The Bahamas are a funny place. There are 900 islands. There are about 90 that are inhabited, but almost all the people, about 350,000 people, all of them live on Nassau, Freeport, and Abaco. So when you get in the back islands like Cat Island or Staniel Cay, there are many islands with just 50, 60, 70 people. And everybody's pretty much on the tourist industry, but you're in places where there just are not people. There are about 60 working airports. Most of them are products of the Seabees in World War II. They are enormous. You're talking about runways that are 200 feet wide and 8,000 feet long. They were designed for practicing the bombing missions that were going to be undertaken in the South Pacific, and so they built these runways for people just to island hop and practice and navigate and do what they had to do in the South Pacific. And because it never freezes there, the surface of the concrete, there's a lot of aggregate exposed. The actual cream of the concrete, a lot of that is spalled off, but because they don't have any freezing conditions, it doesn't really, there are no potholes. The wind is mostly from the northeast, northwest to the southeast. pretty consistent, and most of the runways are in that orientation. You know, we have done this trip 3 times now. We usually go in the dead of winter, January or February, when we're sick of it here. We usually take 8 or 9 days. We take a day to fly to Florida. We'll launch at Fort Pierce or Fort Lauderdale. Then we'll do a bunch of stops. In this case, we did 6 islands, 12 stops. Longest leg was 330 miles, about 2.5 hours. That was over the mainland. And then longest transit over water was coming back from Abaco. We were originally going to have much shorter transits, but the air traffic controller just sent us direct, and we went direct, which probably wasn't the best choice in a single engine aircraft, but we did it. We didn't die, so that's a big metric. There was about 24 hours of flying round trip, you know, maybe 7 hours to get there, 7 hours to get back, and 10 hours of screwing around in the islands. Fuel's expensive, up 9 and 10 bucks a gallon when you're in the islands, but the launching points in Florida are not bad, and you don't really fly that many miles. Lodging has gotten a lot higher. We ran almost this identical trip pre-COVID, and we stayed in a lot of the exact same places. Prices are up over 40% since COVID. I guess they're trying to make the money back that they lost. Food in the Bahamas is a little costly, about 90 bucks a day, so the total door-to-door expenses, including fuel for 3 people for 10 days, was about $5,500. The last time we went with 2 people for 10 days, pre-COVID, it was only $3,500. So it went up a big, quite, well, we had an extra body, but it went up a good bit. You know, so we went from Lauderdale over Grand Bahama, tried to stay over, whoops, go back. Tried to stay over as much land as possible, went down to Lutheran to Cat Island, stayed there, Cat Island to Exuma, Exuma to Staniel Cay, which is on this side, right about there. Staniel Cay is a really nice place to go. And then Staniel Cay to Andros, and then Andros was the long leg over water. That was about 200 miles. The airplane, a lot of you know my RV-10. Light sport aircraft are allowed. Experimentals are okay, but you need to bring a standard validation letter. The validation letter, I don't even understand the purpose. The Bahamas posts it on their website. You just download it and print it and carry it in the plane. There's no criteria. There's no box you need to check. There's nothing you need to sign. You just download it and have it in the plane. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Internationally, you want to have a 12-inch end number on the side of the plane. You can have a temporary end number. You need a radio station license. You need a transponder with a coding. You need an a locator transmitter, and you need a border protection decal. That's very important because it takes about 2 months to get if you order online, and so you have to plan in advance for your trip. I keep a border protection sticker on both aircraft. It's $29 a year, and because both aircraft go to Canada quite a bit, I keep them on both planes. You need some means of EAPIS, which is your manifest reporting. The Customs and Border Patrol has an electronic means to do that. I have never heard of anybody making it through. Everybody, it's so ponderous. There's an app called FlashPass. It costs $78 a year, and the FlashPass thing is effortless. The Customs and Border Patrol free site, I just can't make it work. You'll need an insurance endorsement for operation in the Bahamas. For both airplanes, for me, pre-COVID, post-COVID, that was free. Most insurance companies don't have any problem with the Bahamas. If you take your aircraft to Mexico, it's a little different story. Pilots and passengers need to bring current passport. The restricted radio telephone operator's permit, that's very easy to get. It's an internet order kind of thing. A letter of authorization if the aircraft is not registered in the pilot's name, that's a big deal. If you take a club plane or a rented plane, that is something they ask for, is a letter of authorization. You can download those from AOPA, you can download those from the EAA, but if it's not your airplane, you've got to have a letter of authorization. We had life jackets aboard. When we were over water, we were wearing them. Our life jackets have a strobe, and they have an ELT, emergency locator, well, they're personal locator beacon, PLB. But each life jacket had a PLB, a strobe. We had rafts on board on both occasions, the 2-person in the RV9 and a 4-person in the RV10. We had a ditch bag with all kinds of safety equipment. We had a waterproof floating handheld GPS, VHF radio. We had individual personal locator beacons, a strobe, whistles on each, and mirrors on each life jacket. And we also had an EarthMate GPS worldwide emergency locator. We weren't going to go in the water, but we were prepared if we did go in the water. You want to bring some extra cash, not a lot of ATMs. So this was all of our rescue stuff.
Steve, can't you just use a credit card everywhere?
You can, but there's a lot of, the answer is no. There's some bars and things like that on the small islands you can. They don't have it.
And what currency are they taking?
Dollars.
Okay.
So some of the emergency stuff, you gotta plan for the unexpected. Fortunately, we never had to do any of this, but you know, you really wanna do passenger briefings. I had everybody watch videos of ditching in the water and escaping the airplane. We had a couple tools to break windows that we strategically put in the airplane. We had the packing of the ditch bag. We had extra water. We had life jackets with, that's a personal locator beacon, that's a personal locator beacon. We had a trauma kit, that's an Israeli trauma kit for amputations and really bad bleeding. And so, we carried a lot of crap. We carried an extra VHF radio and a waterproof bag. This was the life raft. But, you take a lot of stuff. It was about half of our cargo load was emergency equipment. But, it was worth it. We didn't use any of it. So, but it was still worth it. So you file a flight plan to get over there out on the outward bound leg. You can go either VFR or IFR. 4-flight works to the Bahamas, it's not a problem. You use the North American map package at 4-flight and it has the Bahamas in it. You file a manifest the day before or at least 2 hours before takeoff. Earlier the better, no more than 48 hours in advance. The manifest just lists who's on the plane, it lists their passport numbers, a lot of stuff. You can, in the FlashPass app that I use, you photocopy the picture page of the passport so that the customs office has all that stuff in advance upload. You make sure you have your life jackets and all your safety stuff. You activate your flight plan before leaving Miami. You notify the airport of entry. You call, there's a number in the Bahamas, and that number's gonna flash up later. And you just tell them I'm coming and I plan to land at XYZ airport within a couple hours of this. And you must land at an airport of entry. There are about 10 in the Bahamas. You will be handed a bunch of paperwork. They'll take $50 for the airplane when you land. When you leave, they take $29 a head to leave. That's always been the funniest fee, that you have to pay to leave. So you have to, but you make sure that for that first fee, you have a $50 bill, because they don't take credit cards, so you have to have the $50 when you arrive. So if you fly VFR, you can get flight following from Miami Center. The problem with flight following all over the Bahamas is you've got some pretty long distances, and so you have to maintain some altitude. If you get down below 4,500 or 5,500 feet and you're down the south end of the chain, Miami won't, they just can't see you. You're over the curvature of the earth. There's some forms. They're no different than the forms you fill out on an airliner. And they're real basic. If you have all your documents, they're no-brainers. $50 to enter, $29 to leave. Weather is tough there. It's not like looking at ATIS and MOS. The key things, when you get down to the down islands, you can get Nassau weather, but Nassau could be 300 miles away, and weather could be a lot different in Nassau. When we were down there, it was right after that big hurricane that hit. I don't recall the name of the hurricane, but the bottom islands, they didn't have a scratch on them, and the big islands, Grand Bahama was just trashed, and so that gives you an idea of the weather differential that can be existent. So there are some resources that you can go to. that are not the conventional aviation resources that are really good for wind and barometric pressure. There's an enormous number of weather stations in the Weather Underground. That you can get the app, it's free, and you know, you can usually find a Weather Underground, a guy who's got basically a weather station in his backyard, within 20 or 30 miles of where you're gonna be. In addition, on ForeFlight, not on the desktop, but in the phone app and your iPad, there's a tab for weather called Daily. I don't know, most people don't use it, most people use the MOS or the TAF or just the instant report. But if you go to the Daily tab, I don't know where their source data is, but it's very accurate. And you can get some daily reporting at almost every airport in the Western Hemisphere that I've found. So that's a really good tab to look at. So that's the That's the ForeFlight weather tab, the daily tab. The Weather Underground had about 40 reporting stations in the Bahamas, and they were 24/7. They were really accurate. But there's a huge difference from dawn to dusk wind and weather. So, you know, if you get a report from NASA and it's 6 hours old, good luck with that. You have no idea what weather you're gonna hit. And we hit, on one island, we landed into a 35-mile-an-hour wind. Now, fortunately, it was blowing largely down the runway. The crosswind component was about 15. But, I mean, I thought, we were at the RV-10, I thought it was gonna take the gull-wing doors right off the airplane. I mean, it was fierce. Winds could change a lot during the day. Our highest surface winds were 35, highest crosswinds were 28, although we never landed in a 28. The most crosswind component we had, fortunately, knock on wood, we had to land in was maybe 12 to 15. Higher winds in the winter, there's daily thunderstorms. In the summer, you know, you gotta think southern Florida weather. Radio frequencies, the CTAF frequency sort of works all over the place, but you gotta have altitude. And a lot of times when you're just hopping, you know, from island to island, from this island to this island, you're never gonna get above 2,500 feet, and you'll basically be in radio silence. Other than calling on the Unicom frequency of the local airport. There'll be no contact with air traffic control. You do not need to file flight plans to do inter-island hopping in the Bahamas. Runways are really big. This is typical from the air. They're enormous. They were designed to take off with B-17s, B-24s, and B-25 bombers in World War II, and laden bombers. So you can imagine there's a lot of runway. There's no tie downs. The nice thing about the runways is not only is the runway ginormous, you know, 6, 7, 8,000 feet, there are no obstacles to speak of. It's flat. There's no terrain, but you gotta bring good chocks. There's no tie down points, and it does get windy. And you gotta bring good gust protection for your flight surfaces, because they will take a beating. There's plenty of parking, but the airports are largely unmanned, and so, you know, if you can lock your airplane, we had no trouble. I can't lock the RV-9. The RV-9 has $50,000 of avionics in it. We had no trouble. But, you know, when I could lock the RV-10 on the later trips, I was happy to be able to lock it. You have no FBOs at the airports, except for the ones that have fuel, and that's about 1 in 5. Some of the runways are north-south due to island geometry, but most are on the cross direction, on the cross compass direction. Some of the islands are just north-south, and there's no, you know, 4,000-foot spot to go against the island, because you'd be in the water on both ends. Runway surfaces are paved, but they're concrete aggregate, and a lot of the milk has come out of the top aggregate, and so they're bumpy. In fact, the first time I landed, I was sure I blew a tire, and it was the only time I was there that there was somebody in the pattern behind me. It was a Cessna Caravan that was doing a freight delivery, and I landed, and I was in the RV-9, and I thought, oh, you know, I blew a tire, I'm in the Bahamas, and so I call up to the guy in the pattern, and I say, I blew a tire, but this airplane's really small, and the runway's like 200 feet wide. I said, give me a minute, I'll push it off the side of the runway. You know, and the guy said, are you sure you blew the tire? And I said, I think so. And he said, just taxi a little bit, make sure. I taxied a little bit and, you know, wasn't pulling anyway. And he said, everybody thinks they blew tires because the aggregate's really bumpy. You know, you get a lot of chatter. So services are very limited. I didn't see one maintenance facility in the Bahamas. I didn't land at the big islands where the airlines are. So there may be some service there, but I didn't see it. So you wanna plan ahead, you know, go there with a fresh oil change, you know, check your tire pressure before you leave, do all your miscellaneous maintenance before you leave. Spare parts a long ways off. We had spare tubes for the main gear and the nose gear. We had a lot of spares with us and a lot of tools. And so fuel is supposed to be available about 10 places. However, a lot of times it's not. You know, you go to a place and you make a call and the barge didn't come with the fuel. And so it's good to call ahead, and it's good to never flight plan for less than 90 minutes of reserve. You know, we landed at Exuma, we needed fuel, and we were told that there was no fuel. We had to make the next leg, which was 25 minutes away. It wasn't any problem because we had 90 minutes of fuel reserve. And so we landed within an hour and got fuel. But if you think you don't want to be flying around there with 30 minutes of fuel in your tank. Fuel's expensive, but almost all the hotels participate in a fuel subsidy program that's sponsored by the government of the Bahamas. Every 2-day stay you stay there, you get $150 off your bill to credit for fuel. So if you stay for 6 days, you get a $450 fuel credit. You know, and that's a big deal. That really bites into your fuel bill. So when you're homeward bound, you're there, you know, you're done going inter-island, you don't have to do flight plans, you don't have to do any check-ins. You file an EFIS manifest, you file a flight plan, you call customs on the date at least 2 hours before you leave, and you tell them which airport of entry you're coming to. We usually come back to Fort Pierce or Lauderdale Executive because they're manned for long hours and they're just there, you know, and they've got a trailer and a physical presence. And you just pull the airplane in front of the trailer, the guy comes out and he does your customs in a minute. You depart the Bahamas, you've got to, this is a pain in the ass, you've got to depart from an airport of entry so they can collect their $29 a person to get you to leave. That's the only reason for it, is to pay the fee. So you're limited to about 10 airports. You activate your flight plan, the phone's best, you get a discrete squawk code, and then you try and land as close to your flight plan as possible, and then you clear U.S. Customs. U.S. Customs coming back is, even if you're, you know, a middle-aged white guy who looks like, you know, he's got Coast Guard colors on his plane and all that stuff, they want to see your documents. That's the only time I've ever had the equivalent of a real, honest-to-God RAM check. They'll want your registration, they want your medical, they want your pilot's license, you know, and they take it very seriously. I had one time where I fumbled, I could not find my medical, and, you know, I thought I was going back to Guantanamo. I mean, this guy was, he had no sense of humor. You know, there's a lot of resources in the Bahamas. AOPA has a guide, it's $40, it's invaluable. It tells you about all the runways, it tells you about lodging, it tells you about some interesting points of interest. It's well worth it. There's the Islands of the Bahamas pilot-free guide, private pilot guide is given out by the Bahama Tourism Bureau. If you go on the Banyan Aviation website, you can download it. It's a great book, same thing, points of interest. All of them provide detailed information on frequencies, phone numbers, guides, weather, runways, all that stuff. There's a lot of free stuff you can get. The biggest thing is the fuel subsidy. That's over there. And then in the back islands, these are all the vendors who participate in that subsidy rebate. That's all in both of the Bahamas guides that I mentioned, the AOPA guide and the one that you get from Banyan Aviation. Both of them have updated lists of all the places that provide the fuel subsidy. This is right out of the Banyan book. These are just phone numbers, ports of entry, all that stuff that you would want to have in the plane with you. And your cell phone does work almost everywhere. You do want, before you go though, to have your cell phone, changed to an international plan. You don't wanna get there and find out your cell phone's shut out. And you also wanna take your ATM card, if you rely on your ATM card, and get the location services turned on to work in the Bahamas, you know. Otherwise you'll find, that won't work. I'm gonna touch briefly on Canada also. We go up to Canada, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a year. Canada's a lot closer than people think, in that RV9, I can get over Niagara Falls and, land in St. Catharines in about an hour and 50 minutes. In the RV10 in about an hour and a half. And so, most people think of Canada as really far away, but it's not far away. And there's some gorgeous places up in Canada. Why Canada? Well, it's the same as us, but a little different. You know, it's comfortable.
They're nice.
They're largely English speaking, unless they don't speak English, and then they make you aware that they don't speak English, but most people speak English. If you go up in the summer, the days are they're crazy long. You know, if you get in Nova Scotia, sometimes sunset doesn't go down till 11 o'clock in July. Most of our regular tools for flight, stuff like that, they work up there. So that's really good. Although mapping functions are, especially in ForeFlight and Garmin, problematic. In that Garmin, if you buy the North American package, you get the United States, and you get over Buffalo, and you get to St. Catharines, and you clear customs, and you have a big black map for the whole rest of Canada. Even though you have the subscription, you actually have to load another data card that you have to prepare before you take off. So if you're gonna go to Canada, the Bahamas is not a problem. The data card for North America supports the Caribbean, but it doesn't support most of Canada. It supports a strip along the border, maybe 30, 40 miles, but you have to have in your pocket a Canadian data card to put in your Garmin, or you're gonna have a black screen flying all over the Great North. So you paid for it, but it's important to have that $1 card in your pocket. Everything that's on sale in Canada now, it's an exchange rate of 1.3 to 1. So, and, you know, it's a big difference. You know, I was just looking at an engine for the Murphy Moose, and it was $55,000 Canadian and like 40 grand US. That's a big difference. You know, because if you price the same thing in the US, it was about 55,000. There are lots of airports, lots of services you're familiar with, lots of grass strips. This was, I don't know where the hell it was. That was in Tobermory. That's me in a waterfall. But the flight plan, you do a regular flight plan. One thing different in Canada, even if you're VFR, if you go more than 25 miles from the aerodrome that you start from, you have to file a flight plan, even VFR. If you stay within a 25-mile circle, you don't have to file a flight plan. Same thing to get there, you use the same AEPIS. You know, if you have to have life jackets, if you're going over the Great Lakes, I recommend that. You activate your flight plan before leaving. You call the airport of entry at least 2 hours, but not more than 48 hours, and tell them you're coming. This is about the only hitch in the whole Canada scheme is the telephone coverage of the Canadian Border Patrol. If you call them in the middle of the day, you can be waiting for hours. I mean, and theoretically, if you arrive at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you haven't called them, you're supposed to wait in the plane. And I'm not exaggerating. We went with another aircraft that followed us, a 182 was the guy's first trip. We had called the evening before, and if you call after business hours, 9 or 10 o'clock at night, you get right through. You make your reservation, you tell Customs and Border Patrol, I'm coming at 2 o'clock, and then you're done. They'll come and meet you. But if you try and land and call them, you can be stuck in your plane for hours. This is the biggest single glitch. They are ponderous. So what you always do is before you're gonna land, the night before, they man those phones 24/7. Anytime after 10 o'clock, they've always picked up the phone on the second ring. No hold time, no voicemail queue, just pick it up. But if you call them on the day you need them, in the middle of the day, you can plan to be on the phone for hours. It's terrible. So if there's one tip about flying to Canada, that's the tip. Call them the day before and get in that queue. You must land at an airport of entry. If the airport of entry has a customs office, you just taxi right there and get inspected. It takes 2 minutes. If it doesn't, they'll come, if you've made the arrangement in advance and you did that call the prior night, there'll usually be a guy waiting there for you, as long as you're on time. There's no fees to enter Canada, but they're really sneaky. If you can make a big mistake landing in the wrong airport. During COVID, they limited to, I don't know, 7 or 10 airports that they were letting you land at. And so, we usually land at St. Catharines, which is just on the other side of Buffalo, but St. Catharines was closed during COVID. So, we figured, well, we'll go to Toronto. It's kind of on the way, it's a big airport, they got a manned customs office 24/7. We call Toronto, landing fees, courtesy fee, handling fee, $1,000 for a small aircraft. Hamilton is 20 miles away. Now Hamilton's gone up to $200, but at the time in COVID it was $20. So 2 airports, 20 miles away, both with full services, a difference between $1,000 and $20 to land. If you land at St. Catharines, which is where we usually go now that it's post-COVID, it's free. And so St. Catharines is pretty much the best jumping off point, because it's only like 20 miles from Buffalo. You fly over Buffalo, you land at St. Catharines. Once you clear at St. Catharines, you can fly all over the country. Flight services at the airports are almost identical to the US. You know, the big airports have a lot of service, the little airports don't have a lot of service. Almost everybody's got fuel. Marijuana is legal in Canada, but you don't want to bring any with you. The 3 questions you get asked every time you cross the border going either way: guns, drugs, money over $10,000. You don't want any of those things in your plane. Differences in flying around Canada versus the US. If you know, on the southern border, maybe the top 100 miles, the southernmost 100 miles of Canada, they got real radar. It's pretty much like flying with flight following here, everything's good. But when you get, Canada's like Australia, you know, all the people live in a very finite area of the country, and the country is huge. And once you get beyond that band of highly populated area in the southern part of Canada, radar coverage is very limited. You're probably gonna be on your own. Weather reporting in remote areas is spotty. Again, the daily tab and ForeFlight does work, and there are also weather underground stations in Canada. VFR weather is sort of defined differently. The minimum visibility and that should be cloud clearance are slightly different. So you know, when you see a field VFR, their standards of VFR are a little looser than our standards of VFR. So you know, it pays to read what the actual things are and not just see the green dot and assume it's what you're used to. Their mandatory frequencies are designated for some use on some uncontrolled aerodromes. You have to do a little better frequency study than you do in the States. There's some frequencies that you do have to monitor. Traffic circuits and patterns vary from US standards and norms. Again, it pays to look at the airport diagram. They're all well diagrammed in ForeFlight, but you can't just assume left pattern 1,000 feet above. They are different. IFR flights do have takeoff minimums in Canada. You know, I wouldn't take off in 00, but some people do. Probably Mark does. Do you take off in 00? You don't take off in the jet in 00? Okay, well, good. I mean, in the United States, technically in instrument flying, there are no takeoff minimums.
It's a company thing, 500 RVRs.
Yeah, but in Canada they do have. And a flight plan, the biggest thing that's different in Canada is for regular VFR flying, a flight plan is required anytime you're going more than 25 miles from the aerodrome. So when you're coming home from Canada, it's much the same. You file your EFIS manifest 2 to 48 hours in advance. You'll receive an email confirmation. The big difference coming back to the United States versus going out is The manifest system is plugged into Customs and Border Patrol, and so when you say in your manifest that you're coming in at 2 o'clock tomorrow, you don't have to call Customs and Border Patrol. They already know. They get and you'll get an email confirmation to your email that's listed in your, again, Flash Pass or whatever EAFIS system you're using. You'll get whatever the corresponding email you have is your email of record. You'll get a message saying Customs and Border Patrol is gonna wait for you at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Even with that, I always call it, just to be sure. US Customs and Border Patrol is really easy to reach telephonically. There's never a wait or a queue. So I always call, the really easy crossings are Niagara, Buffalo, Cleveland, Rochester, and Burlington. All of those are excellent choices to come back. They're close to the border, you know, they're easy to get to, they're big enough airports, they have permanent customs presence, and they're ready to handle you, and the handling takes no time. It's a couple of minutes. When you land, you wanna have your US flight chart data for your Garmin, because again, as you're heading south, if you don't change ships again, your screen is gonna go black just about as soon as you cross Burlington, Vermont. You won't have US data on your Garmin. You'll have all those expensive avionics, and you have black screens. So you wanna have your chip in your pocket, ready to stick in, and then once you clear customs, you just come home. So if anybody has any questions, that's pretty much the way it works. Yes, sir.
I do briefings at AOPA, obviously, and AOPA has an agent in both areas. Your briefings were perfect.
Okay.
There's one new thing, August 1st, ADSB, Canadian A Airspace, 12.5, now has ADSB requirement, August
Right.
1st, but it's 1090. Most of our ADSB here is 978. So you have to look at your ADSB equipment now.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Above 12.5.
Above 12,500?
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So, when you were talking about the Bahamas and the gear plus remote airfields, how does that work in as you're looking at most small airplanes, very limited useful load? And if you're
Well,
trying to keep
you know,
your
I
things
think-
full, and you're a big guy like me, so.
I'm looking at the RB9, and I'm as big as you are. And we loaded the hell out of it. And when it came time for baggage, I have, my one daughter I travel with, fortunately, she's not my size. You know, she's 5'4" and $135, so that was good. And then the other thing was, she's very good at working out of a knapsack for a week. And I worked out of a knapsack for a week, because that's all by the time you take all the safety gear in an RB7 or an RB9, you've used up 75% of your useful cargo space. But again, I wouldn't leave without it.
No, and I understand the risk, I was just wondering how that math worked.
Right, and as a practical matter, people here, you know, we're in the club, if you really wanna undertake this, I own a 2-person raft, and I have a 4-person raft, and I've got all those life jackets, they're like $400 a piece. And if you wanna go, talk to me and I'll loan you the equipment. We've got all that equipment in the hangar.
Do they have to pay for it if they use it?
Huh?
Do they have to buy it if they use it?
Yeah, you have to buy it if you use it. Yeah.
I would assume that if you're gonna go to the Bahamas, even though you say you can go VFR, you should be IFR rated, right?
No, people go VFR all the time. You know, the thing is, and in the 3 trips I've done, I've never been, I filed IFR flight plans just to be on record of where I'm going and what I'm doing, but I've actually never flown in IFR conditions in the islands.
And me being an experience, just thinking out loud about this, but isn't it nerve-wracking that, from what I read, is like when you go in, like, especially if you don't get a weather report, and you get bad weather, like, you know, you can't see out there.
Well, you can get weather reports, you just have to use unconventional sources.
Right.
You know, and again, I was reading an article today, and I have a place in Key West that I go to in the winter. And Cancun, and I fly the plane there. And Cancun is like 330 miles from Key West across the Gulf of Mexico. And that's if you avoid an overfly permit of Cuba. And so I got a couple airplanes that'll go 330 miles pretty good. But For me, in my personal risk calculus, I'm not flying a single engine plane for 330 miles over water. I have a hard enough time flying over West Virginia. You know, you get over the backside of West Virginia, it's frightening. You go 100 miles and there's no place to put an airplane down. You know, there's no fields, there's no water, there's just places to kill yourself. And, so, you know, you all have to, everybody has to do their own risk calculus. You know, when I go over that first 58 miles, and I do the same thing at Lake Michigan or Lake Huron, you know, when I get my feet wet, the airplane's 14,000 feet up. And then, or 16, or 17.5. And, you know, so I've got a glide of, you know, about 2 miles to 1,000. And so I've got a 28-mile glide at 14,000. It's a 60-mile trip across Lake Michigan. I have about 4 miles in the middle where I'm at a point of no return. But for the first 28 miles and the last 28 miles, I can get my feet dry with no engine. I'll do that. I'll go to Bimini, same deal. I can pretty much do it with no point of no return in the middle, and plus there's an enormous amount of boat coverage. You don't get the boat coverage on the Great Lakes, but I'm not gonna go a couple hundred miles voluntarily without having land under me. That's just me, but other people may be different. Mark's probably different. He's very brave. I'm very timid.
You'll notice I haven't done this trip in my airplane.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Did you do any studying on how to put a tricycle gear plane in water?
Yeah, it's not pleasant.
What's the crux of it? You try to pull it up into
You
a
try
stall
and get close to
dump it?
stall, and you go across the trough of the wave, and you wanna hit it at a low spot. You basically wanna follow the low spot of the wave, parallel to the wave peaks in the trough. And you're still
You
gonna
wanna get
probably dump it
behind the
over.
wave.
Yeah, you probably, and then you wanna touch it down tail first. You basically stall it in the last 3 feet, but you're probably still gonna tip over.
Sully did it.
What?
Sully did it.
Yeah, well, he has gear up.
He had his gear up, exactly. I mean,
Other questions?
You can't put your gear up in a RV.
Yes, sir.
So, in some of those remote islands that you were at, you know, you didn't have any FBO there or any facilities or anything. Did you have a backup plan or a contingency plan in the event that you had an inoperable plane?
Well, you know, what we tried, when I go to Canada, I've been really successful with the Smokehouse Pilot Group, and I've always had a wingman. And what we're really, the wingman effectively is there to fly for parts. You know, I'm moderately competent in fixing the RVs because I built them. And, you know, my concept about having a wingman, he's not gonna, well, he certainly could help spot you if you went down in the ocean, but the real thing he's there for is to fly for spares if you really get in a jam. I was supposed to have a wingman on my last trip to the Bahamas, and he crapped out on me. He had mechanical problems before he started. And so we flew alone, but in the last 3 or 4 times I've done Canada, I've flown with a wingman that I've gotten off of Facebook, Smokehouse Pilots, and that's been very reassuring. You know, just that if either one of us have a problem, there's somebody who can fly 2 hours away, grab some parts, come back, and help out. Yes, sir.
You mentioned when you park up that you brought like a good set of chalks and some tie downs, but you also said there was no spot to tie down to.
No, I said Gus lock. And
Gus lock, okay.
Yeah, Gus lock. There's nothing to tie down to. Really nothing. You know, you're on hard coral. I mean, you can't even drive nails in it. Any other questions? Well, in Canada though, they have tie downs.
Yeah.
Almost all the airports, even the small airports in Canada, have that horizontal cable that you can tie your mains to. You know, that seems to be the standard equipment up in Canada.
How's the fuel storage facilities there? Any concerns about fuel contamination?
I check my fuel, you know, I may not be as diligent as I should be to check for water in my fuel as frequently as I should, but I check with every time I buy gas there. Because they they do empty those tanks, you know, and you're getting the last of the condensation and the spooge and the crud. I haven't had any problems with contamination, but I do site glass my tanks, both tanks, every time I get gas. And again, I haven't had a bad experience, but I know that they run those tanks empty, and when you run the last 2 inches out, that's where all the water and the crud comes out.
Cool.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody, I appreciate it.
Yeah.